That little jingle is music to my ears, and if you're a fan of Totally Spies, it probably washes over you with a wave of nostalgia. I remember the first time I saw Totally Spies during its original broadcast run on Cartoon Network in the US back in the early to mid 2000s. The animation was really solid, the characters were interesting, and the writing was pretty clever. This may sound surprising since I very likely wasn't the target audience considering the attention paid on fashion and makeup, but this thematic focus never felt superficial in the show. These characters, Sam, Clover, and Alex, weren't defined by some vapid obsession over their looks. They were interesting characters who were incredibly capable and clever spies who just happened to also be into fashion and makeup. They were high school students, in Beverly Hills no less. Who could blame them? So even back then I recognized this was a pretty darn good show. Plus, each episode was full of exotic locations, creative over-the-top villains, and a bevy of neat little gadgets that a techno-fantasy geek like myself could really get into. But these kind of shows are often the target of game publishers looking to make a quick buck by scooping up the license, throwing the project to an unproven small development team under a very short time frame, and then pushing it to the market in a barely playable and often completely uninteresting state. And yet, this is honestly an outstanding game, and it really warms my heart to say that. In playing Totally Spies for the GBA, I got the feeling that the developer really cared about the show, its characters, and the world it established. The tone is just spot on. It felt like they were fans of the series and put a lot of love and effort into making the game faithful to the TV animation. So how exactly does Totally Spies for the GBA manage to be one of the best licensed games ever made? Well, let's take a look. The first thing that really struck me about this game is the overall visual presentation. It just looks like an episode of Totally Spies. Now don't get me wrong, the intro cutscene of the game is certainly rough. It's pixelated and artifacted and compressed to a level that is borderline absurd. It looks especially bad when blown up to fit the size of a modern display, but bear in mind that when this game was released, most people were playing it on a Game Boy Advance with a small 240 by 160 display, so it wasn't quite as atrocious. Before each level, the player is shown a visual novel-style intro that pretty much follows the same formula of the show. The trio of girls will be living their typical high school lives before their handler Jerry calls on them with some special mission outlining the crisis, the villain, and the gadgets the girls have at their disposal for that particular level. Now, I don't expect the graphics to look great with it being on the Game Boy Advance and all, but there are some real bright spots here. Firstly, the character sprites are fantastic, and they feature so many frames of fluid animation. Take for example this stage featuring Alex. There's the combat animation, jumping animation, sneaking animation, acrobatic ledge flip, shimmying across a pipe, and Alex even catches her balance when she's too close to the edge of a platform, sort of like how Sonic the Hedgehog does in his classic 2D games. I have to imagine this was a direct inspiration. And notice how she brushes her hair back just after performing a ledge flip? That's a nice touch. As neat as the visual presentation is, the best thing about Totally Spies for the GBA is the sheer level variety. There are side-scrolling platform levels, horizontal racing levels, a top-down stealth level, a shoot-'em-up level, and even a rhythm game level. This game is just brimming with variety. It's really something special and totally unexpected for a licensed game on a handheld console. And the fact that the developer had to implement different control schemes to match these different gameplay types, and that those controls are actually good, is a marvel in its own right. In fact, the only way to give this game its proper respect is to actually look at each level one by one, and that's exactly what I'm going to do here. So buckle up, this is going to be a fun ride. The first stage is about as simple as it gets, and it plays on a 2.5D plane where the player can move in all directions within the play area while scrolling the stage to the right. It reminds me of classic beat-em-ups like Final Fighter, Streets of Rage, only in this opening stage there's really no action. It's all about evasion. Move forward, stay out of the searchlights, and you'll be fine. Then I arrive at a minefield and I have to send a sweeper gadget to pass through the mines, and I discover something important. The laser system is on a grid with 4 horizontal rows. If you tap the directional pad up or down, the gadget only moves 1 square on the grid. This makes it especially easy to control and avoid the searchlights because the gadget isn't sliding all over the place. It's an added level of precision that makes me think the developers really took the time to optimize this brief section of the level. But even with the good controls, this section poses a nice challenge, and I find myself getting caught up by one of the searchlights where I'm treated to a failure screen. And I'll be honest, the failure screens are one of the more whimsical aspects of this game. Even when I failed on a level, I didn't mind because I'd be treated to some humorous original artwork of the girls bungling their mission. And this brings up one of the other great benefits to this game. When you fail a section or run out of life and have to restart, the checkpoints throughout the levels are incredibly generous. You're sent just far back enough to feel like you need to reattempt a tricky section, but you're not sent so far back that it feels frustrating or a waste of time. So I complete the level as Sam and meet up with Clover and Alex, where I'm treated to a nice little victory screen of the 3 girls cheerfully celebrating. The next stage has me taking control of Alex, and this time around I'm given a series of attack moves by pressing the B button. There's not much in the way of enemies in this stage, but mashing the B button allows me to perform a combo maneuver to break down a bunch of security robots. The combat is admittedly a little slippery. The robots only damage Alex with a specific shock attack, so she can sort of walk right by them with the right timing, but it's so much more satisfying to bash them into scrap. As I mentioned earlier, the animation on Alex here is absolutely phenomenal. Her attack moves look great. Her jumping animation and momentum reminds me of the old Prince of Persia games, which means it can be a bit tricky to maneuver Alex through the stage. It's not the most tight and responsive set of controls that you might want from a 2D platformer, but it's serviceable and it does allow for all these different sets of animation. So this stage is all about making it through a cosmetics factory while avoiding the security robots and vats of boiling perfume. This area also has its own mini-game where Alex has to use a safe-cracking gadget to break in and retrieve important documents. Now this safe-cracking minigame is not easy by any means and requires the player to perfectly time button presses when a fluctuating meter passes through a small safe zone. It reminds me of nailing perfect button presses for a golf swing in Mario Golf. It's a fun little idea, and some of the later safes in the stage can get really tough. If you fail at cracking a safe, it's not like an alarm goes off and you fail the entire stage. You just retry the minigame right there and then. Level 1-3 sees a ne'er-do-well trying to contaminate vats of cosmetics with toxic sludge, and you're tasked with shooting pure water at this sludge as it falls from one of 3 different dispensers. It starts off easy as pie, but quickly becomes a nice exercise in dexterity and reaction time. The nice thing about this level is that the water cannon we control moves between rolls with a single tap of the D-pad, so players aren't required to precisely cursor over the toxic goo with pinpoint accuracy like they would be in a gallery shooter like Point Blank on the original PlayStation. It's fun without being frustrating. Stage 2-1 sees Alex rappelling down a vertical corridor while avoiding laser tripwires. This stage gave me immediate flashbacks to a similar level from Battletoads on the NES, only far less difficult and infuriating. I do wonder how come these intermittent lasers never cut the cord she's rappelling on, but I suppose I can suspend my disbelief here. Every once in a while, Alex will come across a control panel that she needs to hack into in order to progress further down the corridor. This brings up a fun little minigame that tasks players with inputting a sequence of button presses, which I like. It's much more engaging than simply activating the switch with a single button press, which most licensed games would lazily default to. Then we come across a series of fans that will blow Alex into a laser grid unless we rapidly tap the directional pad in the opposite direction of the airflow. I have to admit that it requires some seriously fast button mashing that sort of caught me off guard. Also, these fans are motion activated when you cross their pathway, so you can't just wait them out in hopes that they'll deactivate after a period of time. Level 2-2 is a basic memory game where players are shown a specific sequence of symbols and then have to input them in the same order in a short time frame. It's nothing too difficult, but it is a nice change of pace, and the sequences do increase in both number and complexity over the course of 5 rounds. It's basically a memory sequence game like the classic Simon. Level 2-3 sees Clover navigating the side of a tall building as she works her way up to the rooftop. I have to point out how much I appreciate Clover's character sprite and animation here. She's pressed up against the edge of the building to keep from falling off. She tiptoes as she walks in a very careful and measured way. It's a nice touch that feels appropriate for the scenario, and it shows a thoughtfulness on the part of the developer. Clover controls much like Alex did in her 2D platforming stage, with similar Prince of Persia style physics and momentum. The major gameplay mechanic here is avoiding any lit windows so as to not be seen by any of the residents inside. It's a fun little section that requires precise timing by jumping between platforms and shimmying across ledges. Though I have to wonder, what sort of residents simply pace back and forth in their apartments, turning the lights on and off intermittently? Again, you gotta suspend your disbelief here and not think too hard about it. Level 3-1 is Halloween themed, so I'm instantly in a good mood, and it's at this point that I realize something kinda neat. The artwork on these still frames isn't just official, it's literally lifted from the show. I remember this particular Halloween themed episode from season 3. It's one of my favorite episodes. Now some people might say it's lazy just to take some screenshots from the series and scan them right into the game, but I actually feel like it adds a nice bit of authenticity, and I'll happily take a pleasant reminder of one of my favorite episodes any day of the week. This level sees Alex work her way through what looks like a dungeon, but its design is sort of all over the place. You have spiders and cobwebs, random steam pipes, broken electrical wires, smashed crates, and full suits of body armor. It's such an eclectic hodgepodge of visual design that it takes me back to 16-bit era side-scrolling platform games. So the goal here is to find and free 7 cheerleaders who are glued to the walls of this dungeon. It's pretty much the exact same formula as level 1-2, but with a different visual theme. Level 3-2 is basically a sorting minigame where you press buttons corresponding to different piles as objects scroll along on a conveyor belt. This is so dull that I almost can't believe it made it into the game. Thankfully, it doesn't last too long. The next level makes up for this by presenting players with a top-down horizontal high-speed chase along a freeway with pedestrian traffic as you control a futuristic anti-gravity bike attempting to escape from a semi-trailer truck. And it's even more silly that this truck shoots lasers from time to time. But the actual gameplay is pretty fun as you try to maneuver between traffic while dodging the occasional laser blast. Though I do have to admit, some of the laser blasts seem impossible to dodge when you're squeezed in by traffic and can't switch lanes. Then you get random oil slicks along the road that you have to avoid, but at least you can use these oil slicks as a weapon by luring the truck into them as it gives chase. After playing this, I was reminded of the speeder bike level from Battletoads, only it's much more bearable in Totally Spies, so that's twice now that this game has taken inspiration from a classic game and made it a lot easier and more approachable. Level 4-1 sees the girls auditioning as background dancers in order to become undercover bodyguards for a famous pop star. It's a fun rhythm minigame that reminds me of Parappa the Rapper on the original PlayStation. It starts out simple enough, but then you're suddenly dealing with 2 rows of button prompts that you have to time to the rhythm, and it becomes very enjoyable. It's really remarkable how this hodgepodge of different level design actually works in this game, and it's such a pleasant surprise whenever you encounter one of these new variations. Level 4-2 is probably the most spy-themed section of the game. It reminds me of the classic Metal Gear on the NES. You move each of the 3 characters around a top-down map while avoiding security cameras, robot patrols, and laser tripwires. Your goal is to find and hack these security terminals in order to deactivate the various obstacles that block your path. Of course, each of these terminals consists of a button press sequence minigame, which is always nice. This is the level where I felt the game really came into its own, and I would have loved a bunch more of these with increasingly complex puzzles. In fact, I think you could make a whole game of this mechanic, it's that good. Level 4-3 is another side-scrolling vehicle chase scene, but this time on snowmobiles down a snowy mountainside. If the last chase scene kind of felt like the speeder bike stage from Battletoads, this one leans into that inspiration even further. Here, you're avoiding obstacles and jumping over gaps just like in Battletoads. It can get real nail-biting as the overall speed and number of obstacles increases. I had to actually retry this level a couple of times, but it never became too frustrating because it never felt cheap or unfair. I just recognized that I had to dial in and maximize my reaction time, and I was fine. Level 5-1 sees the trio pilot a submarine around an underwater cavern full of mines and enemy subs as they attempt to deactivate a series of bombs planted throughout the area. The submarine is equipped with an unlimited number of torpedoes, so this feels a bit like a cross between Echo the Dolphin and Gradius, which I will gladly accept. The only problem with this stage is the overall control of the submarine. This thing just flies across the screen at the touch of the D-pad. It's incredibly slippery, and it can make avoiding mines in tight quarters and lining up precise shots against enemy subs quite difficult. I mean, look at this mess. How am I supposed to avoid all this? So yeah, this is probably the level that I had to restart the most number of times. The mechanics and level design are good here, but the slippery controls mar what would otherwise be a great experience. Level 5-2 is another 2D platforming stage featuring Alex. This time she's in a volcanic cave looking to deactivate a bomb that would cause the volcano to erupt. Again, these platforming stages just get better and better in terms of layout and design. It's nice to see these kind of improvements. One thing I especially like here is that if I hold down on the D-pad, the camera will shift down and show the environment below Alex. This helps me avoid laser fields and deadly pits of lava. Level 5-3 sees the trio piloting a giant mech suit as they try to take down a satellite installation. This involves the player dodging lightning attacks from above and laser attacks from the side. This can get a bit hectic as things become fast and furious, but it's nothing too involved. Now you'd think that piloting a giant mech would be awesome, but it controls so clunky and slow that it's hardly satisfying. Though I will give credit to the visual design as you can actually see all 3 of the spies inside the mech's cockpit. The final stage sees Sam skydiving after a small drone craft while dodging incoming fire blasts from the aircraft she's chasing. Every once in a while, the player is given an opportunity to nosedive to the drone and input a disarm sequence to disable it. You go through this sequence 3 times, and the game is over. That's it. One of the few genuine criticisms I could give this game is that it's too short. I completed the game in about an hour. I wish there was more of it. And if the worst thing that I can say about a game is the fact that I wanted to play more of it, that's not a bad problem to have. But hey, there is a sequel, so you know what we'll be playing next time. Now, I've played a ton of terrible licensed games over the years, but I have to give credit where it's due. Totally Spies is a great video game in its own right. I made references to a lot of other classic games in this video, and that was out of respect. I think it's perfectly fine for a small development team working on a licensed title to take inspiration from games that they loved and put elements of those games into their creation. The fact that Totally Spies implements these classic gameplay mechanics so effectively is worth praising. I would happily take another dozen levels of this gameplay variety, even if those levels retread some of the same themes and mechanics. That's what I'm hoping for in the sequel, so if you want to stay tuned for that, please consider subscribing to my channel and maybe even leaving a like and a comment below. I appreciate all of you.